Hello everyone, this is the FLIMSY 3 weeks part 4, and today I want to deal with a very interesting custom that some have and some don't have regarding words of comfort on Tisha Bav. It seems to be totally and utterly out of place. When the Shulchan Aruch codifies that we're not allowed to learn Torah on Tisha Bav, he does say that you can learn the harsh parts of the Torah, namely read the book of Eov, Job, read the very harsh prophecies about the destruction of the temple in Yeshayahu, in Yirmiyahu, but he's very explicit, and I quote, "V'im yesh b'neihem psukei nechama tzarich l'dalgam." But if you happen to come across any sort of verses that talk about comfort, you have to skip over them. It's not appropriate on the day of Tisha Bav to speak about comfort. But it happens to be, there is such a custom. Indeed, the Ramah says 2 halachos regarding Tisha B'Av that has to do with comfort. Halacha number 1. Noagim lomar k'tzat nechama achar kinot, lifsok b'nechama. After we read the kinot in the morning, we actually end with words of comfort so that when we leave shul, that will be the last lingering thought in our minds. Halacha number 2. V'haminhag ha'pashut she'en omrim nachem rak b'tfilat mincha shel Tisha B'Av. As we mentioned yesterday, you only say nachem, that insertion in the blessing of Yerushalayim ircha berachamim tashuv, return to Jerusalem. You only say that blessing starting with the word nachem, comfort, at mincha of Tisha B'Av. That's what the Ramah says, and it's interesting that the reason he brings seems to be, as we say in Hebrew, higayon b'shigaon, absolute opposite logic. Lefi she'az hitzitu b'mikdash velachem mitpalalim az ad nechama. So it seems like the Ramah says that because the Beis HaMikdash was actually destroyed at mincha time of Tisha B'Av, namely in the later afternoon, that's when we start talking about comfort. Seems to be the opposite. If that's when the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, was destroyed, then that should be the time we should uplift our mourning and not actually down our mourning. But, says the Ramah, no, that's the most appropriate time to actually talk about comfort. So, what do we make out of these 2 halachos of the Ramah? On the one hand, the Shulchan Aruch says explicitly when you learn Torah, skip over anything that has to do with comfort. But on the other hand, it seems like the Ramah says that you should end the keynote with words of comfort, not to mention saying nachim, comfort, at mincha time. So, there is a Shayarei Knesset Agdola, Rabbi Bemen Bishti, who was a rabbi in Izmir, who actually quotes the book Tzeda Laderech. There's so many of them, so I'm not sure which one he's quoting, that says that it is totally inappropriate, and he doesn't agree with these words of the Ramah. He says, there are some places that say words of comfort in the afternoon, and I have no idea where this custom came from. The entire day you're not allowed to learn, let alone say words of comfort. It's a day of mourning, not a day of comfort. But having said that, it seems like this is an established minhag, and I'd like to explain it based on what Rav Soloveitchik said many, many times. And he quoted a Rashi in Maseches Kiddushin, who's quoting a Medrash. So let's quote it directly from the Medrash, because the Medrash says it beautifully. There is a beautiful psalm that talks about very harsh things. Why do I say a beautiful psalm, harsh things? Because it starts with the word mizmor. Mizmor means a psalm, like Mizmor LeDavid, happiness. And it says, Mizmor LaAsaf, Elohim ba'u goyim b'nachalatecha, timu et echal kodshecha, samu et Yerushalayim le'iyim. A psalm to Asaf, no more and no less. Oh God, heathens have entered your domain, defiled your holy temple, and turned Jerusalem into ruins. So the Medrash says, that's the way you start a harsh psalm. You say, hey, they came into the temple and they destroyed it. And you start with the word mizmor, like, let's make a nice happy song. Mizmor LeDavid. It makes totally no sense. You should say bechi la'asaf, a cry to Asaf, or kina la'asaf, a lamentation to Asaf. Why do you say mizmor? Explains the Medrash that indeed there was a little comfort on the day that the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. And what was the comfort? Says Asaf, mizamerani, I'm singing, sheshafach HaKadosh Baruch Hu chamato al ha'itzim v'al havanim v'lo shafach chamato al Yisrael. That thank God, God went ahead and poured out his wrath, which was not good, but only on Eitzim va'avanim, on trees and on rocks, but not on the Jewish people. Namely, you're singing because on the one hand, the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed and we don't hide it, but on the other hand, the Jewish people were saved. And in the keynote itself, we make reference to this many times, and I'll just quote two examples. In the keynote in the morning, starting with the words Echayaf Shvach Havatzeret HaSharon, the Balakina writes, Yado Paras Star Beveit Zvul. Unfortunately, God allowed the enemy to come into his temple. Tikliach Huyafti Kedor Mabul. The temple suffered because I, namely the Jewish people, were deserving to be destroyed like the generation of the big flood of Noach. But, having said that, God only destroyed his own chair, his own temple. But more explicitly, in the Kina, starting with the words Lecha Hashem HaTzedakah, there's a part of it that says, Lecha Hashem HaTzedakah, God, you did us a great favor. We no more, no less say to God, God, you did us a great favor by destroying your temple. How was that a favor? Because anu kayamim, because we are still alive. A temple can always be rebuilt. I heard from my Rebbe Rav Amital, that's the reason why on Sukkot, the custom is to say Haracham anu yakim lanu et sukkah David hanofelet at the end of benching. Namely, God should rebuild the temple, and we call it a sukkah, because a sukkah can always be rebuilt. We take it apart and put it together every single year. So, as you could see, temple was destroyed, and it's a terrible day and a harsh day, but there's a little comfort in the fact that we are still alive. And that's what the Birkei Yosef the Chida explains in the name of the Hari. He brings this minhag to say the words of comfort, and he indeed references this medrash and ends with three words that I couldn't believe. That when the temple was destroyed, Shafach Hamato Leitzim Va'avanim, God poured out his wrath on wood of the temple, on the stones of the temple, not on the Jewish people, Vesamchu Simcha Gdola, and they had a great happiness. They were happy with a great happiness. Namely, no more and no less. It was a tragedy. We were still alive. And yes, we went into exile, but we returned. And we went into exile, and thank God we returned in this generation. And Tisha Bav has to be a day where you not only talk about the tragedies, you talk about the comfort. So indeed, some disagreed with this minhag of saying words of comfort, but others said no. That's part and parcel of Tisha B'Av. Just like we mourn for what we lost and what we lack to this day, we also have to mention what was left. Thank God, with the Jewish people left, just like a sukkah, we can always rebuild the Sukkot David Hanofelet. Thus, another example of these 3 weeks being flimsy. Indeed, not only is the Jewish people alive, but Bezrat Hashem, with God's help, the temple will be rebuilt, and Tisha B'Av will become a day of total nechama, of total comfort. Yo